Just when I thought I'd never seen anything before in my entire life, I never thought I'd seen anything yet like some of what we've all seen as of lately. And I'm about to show you some of what I'm talking about right now.
This show is for those of you who understand that fearlessness isn't a single action, but it's a lifestyle. So let's freaking go.
It could work! Intense enough to warp the very fabric of space and time.
This is Spain Destination.
Very simple question. Do you believe in miracles?
Are miracles real? Let's investigate.
A lot of skeptics will say, well, miracles are impossible. Why? Because they violate the laws of nature. You can't violate the laws of nature.
I looked at my hand that was clutched. I said, hand move.
We got the 2125.
Hallelujah!
He's dead. It's over. I said, shock him one more time.
I think I have your attention now. Joining me now is CBN News investigative journalist and host of Investigating the Supernatural Miracles, Billy Hollowell. Billy, I mean, obviously the trailer is very gripping and it's obvious what it's about, right? It's miracles. You guys are doing a deep dive investigating. Tell me some of the miracles that you guys investigated and what my audience needs to know about the existence of such miracles.
Oh, let me tell you, it was a remarkable project. You know, I went in as, look, I'm a Christian, but I'm a skeptic. I want people to prove it to me. So we really went into a number of these stories, and I'll share a couple of them with you. We had scenarios where there was a man who had fallen on the ice. He was a cop. He broke his neck, and he spent 10 years paralyzed on half of his body, desperate, seeking healing, and he ended up going to a prayer event. And at this prayer event, and by the way, this is probably I don't even know, he went to maybe 100 of these events, never got healing, and ended up in this final event getting healing. And so these are the kinds of stories that we dove into. But, you know, I don't want people to just take that at face value. We went deep into really the medical evidence, finding corroboration. We went around the entire country telling these stories in depth. And even going into it skeptically, I will tell you, Tommy, I came out of it feeling very differently about these stories than I did actually going into it, because the veracity was just so strong.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think it's an incredible process, and you brought up some of the medical evidence. How do you show medical evidence of a miracle? How do you go about that process? I'm very curious.
Yeah, so this is interesting because people will say, can you ever 100% prove a miracle? And I think the reality is you're never going to 100% get there, but you're going to get to a place where the details are so remarkable, they're so bizarre that you find yourself saying, okay, I'm 99% of the way there. I don't understand how somebody, for instance, could have an inoperable brain tumor, a brain tumor that you can't treat. There's no medication for it. There's nothing you can do. You are just going to die because of the location of it. And you can have that person have that tumor disappear entirely and only leave behind scar tissue. And all of these people, and this is important too to note, who are in this documentary, they are all people who sought healing. So they were praying, they were going to churches, and they were going to revivals. They were going anywhere they could to find that healing. When you have a case like that, I mean, look, if somebody, I think God works through people too. So if you go to a doctor and he does chemo, and look, you can say that that's a miracle too. But these are cases where it disappeared, it changed, and the only discernible thing that was really being done was seeking God in prayer. And so, yes, you can't prove it 100%, but you can get very, very close, and you have the medical records to look at. And so we spent a lot of time not only looking at the medical records, but pulling in the other people who were involved in these cases. And Tommy, I'll tell you, one of the cases involves a person who was dead for 40 minutes, on his way to the morgue almost. And we interviewed that man, who is live and well now. And so they're incredible stories.
So I think, too, you mentioned these individuals that you spoke to and really investigated what happened to them. They were all people of faith. They were people that were seeking out God and the power of prayer. And I'm a true believer in the power of prayer. Listen, I think that You have to be if you're a Christian. You have a sense of belief in that just inherently. But I think a lot of people that are maybe very curious about this are like, listen, I'm like you. I'm a skeptic. So I believe I'm a person of faith, but I'm not all the way sold. Does that mean that a miracle couldn't happen to me? And through your work with this and the documentary and talking to these people, what would be your answer to someone that said that?
I love that question. And I can tell you a personal story, too, of something that's happened to me during this with my own daughter. But, I think a lot of people are in that camp because, look, we've all had friends and relatives who died. If you're a Christian, you know the story of Lazarus, who Jesus brings back from the dead. Well, Lazarus died again. So at some point, miracles run out, right? You may have them, but they're not always going to happen. And we all know people who we have desperately wanted a miracle for, and that miracle has not come. And so we can have that conversation. It's an important conversation because it does get complicated. But if you're on the fence, I think investigating the supernatural will really help you navigate some of this because we don't candy coat the fact that not everybody gets a miracle. You have to address that. There are lots of people right now watching or listening to this who are desperately seeking a miracle and they may not get it. And that is complicated and there's a lot of nuance there. And so we do address that. But I would encourage people because when I went into this project, I've been a Christian my whole life. I've never really seen these radical miracles happen in front of me. So I went in thinking, okay, I want to prove these stories are true. I know it's possible. I believe the Bible. But what I was so blown away by was the radical sort of way in which these people, they would not give up. They were so persistent in looking for that miracle. And I thought to myself going into it, if I had a relative who was desperately ill, would I approach it the same way they did? Would I have that persistence to keep going for 10 years, even though I wasn't getting healing? And the answer is no, not before this project, but it really changed the way, and I think it will for other people, I saw faith and trust. And so that's the goal for me, is to help people really look at how they're trusting God.
Right. Well, you mentioned that you had, a personal experience with that within your own family during this process. What happened there? What can you tell us about, some of the evidence in your own life?
Yeah, and this is an interesting, example. My daughter, who is 9 years old, when she turned 6, we went for a routine physical and they were looking at her spine and the doctor said, and they usually aren't screening for scoliosis that early. The doctor was immediately like, you need to get her to a specialist. Her spine does not look right. And, we were a little freaked out. We took her to the doctor and we went from having a totally normal, active kid who was doing everything she could and playing and whatever to a kid who had a 34-degree curve in her spine, which is significant for a 6-year-old. If you hit 50, you're usually surgical, which you do not want to be doing back surgery on a 6-year-old. And she went into a back brace, 21 hours a day. And a lot of our life was sort of filtered around not only that brace and her being in it was a full torso brace, but also, physical therapy. And, thank God it wasn't a terminal illness, but it was a big change in our family. And I really had to lean in. And this was happening at the same time, we were starting this project. I really had to lean into prayer and think differently about how I was going to approach things. And so as I was learning, I was doing this in my own life. And right now, and who knows what the future holds, she is out of her brace. She barely has scoliosis. The doctors are mesmerized looking at how straight her spine is right now. And I think, of course, it's a mixture of things in her case, but I believe absolutely that prayer and the miraculous, and I think God's sort of shown me that as I've been working on this, have been at play in that story, in that journey.
That's amazing. Well, also, it's amazing for your family. Thank you for sharing that. You brought up prayer, and I think for people who think about something horrible happening to them, an illness, an injury, something catastrophic in their family, a major traumatic life event that has impacted their lives, it's easy to say just pray about it, but a lot of people don't know how to pray. And I'm wondering, through this process and investigating these miracles and people that were actively seeking out a miracle or a prayer or guidance or advice from above, is there anything that you learned about how to pray? Is there a right way to pray? Is there a wrong way to pray? Is there a preferred way to pray? Or is it simply just ask and you shall receive? Because I think a lot of people are very confused about that as a part of their own spiritual journey.
I love that. I love your questions on this. It's so important. I think a lot of us think we have to pray in a specific way. It's like, okay, there's a pattern, or, the Our Father, people will just say the Our Father and they think they sort of accomplished this thing. What I have noticed with the people that we encountered, they desperately wanted something and they were seeking God for it. And they were just honest with God. They'd pray in the shower. They'd pray wherever they were. There was no, you didn't have to be on your knees doing a specific thing. It was just being honest and open with God. And God already knows, if you look at what Scripture says, he knows what people need. He knows what's on our hearts, but really they would cry out to God and be honest. And I think honesty is one of the best things we can do when it comes to prayer, because he already knows. So why are we pretending he doesn't? And he knows what we need and what we want. But the bigger thing, and this really convicted me as a Christian who went into this with certain presuppositions, is that I don't think we trust enough. This trust that no matter what happens, if I have cancer, I may not get healed from cancer, right? I want that miracle. I'm praying for it, and I'm desperately going and being honest with God about the difficulty and what I'm struggling with. But I may need to say, you know what, God, I'm going to put this in your will. And I think this is the hardest thing for us to do. And these people with the miracle stories, they did this. They said, look, we are going to fight till the end. I'll fight all the way till I die if I have to. But I'm going to believe that God will do this. And if he doesn't, I'm going to trust that he has a plan for me. And I think that is the hardest thing in the human experience to live out, that radical trust and that radical honesty in how we approach God.
Yeah, I think one of the things that puts a lot of people who are of faith at ease is not only the power of prayer, but the power of giving it to God. And I know that that's a big part of the journey for a lot of people, and it's not easy for most to do. It's not easy for those who are used to having an extreme amount of control over their life and their decisions to give something to God. I really appreciate it, and congratulations on a wonderful, piece of work, because it really is, and it's needed. So, Billy, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. I hope everyone goes and checks it out. Great work, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.